Welcome to Books and Beyond with That Guy Jay. I am your host, That Guy Jay. Before we jump into our guest interview today, we should do the watch of the day real quick. Today, I am wearing the Casio AE 1200. This is frequently referred to as the Casio Royale. Based on its appearance, it very closely resembles a Seiko that was in a James Bond movie. This was my first Casio digital watch. It is really fun. It has an analog clock here as well as a digital clock. It is considered a world timer. It can do multiple time zones and it shows you on the little map which time zone you're currently monitoring. It has all of the cool Casio features. It has multiple alarms, stopwatch, timer, all of that great stuff for under $20. I think it is a really fun and really unique watch. I love it in this bronze color. It came on a black rubber strap, but I swapped it out for a green NATO style strap. And even though this is one of my first watches, it is still one that I wear very frequently. Now, from there, let's jump into our interview portion. Today, we are joined by author Jeff Pantanella. And real quick, if you could like, share, subscribe, hit any of the buttons, it really makes such a difference. And I appreciate any and all support. But yeah, let's get to the interview. All right, everybody, let's get into the main topic today. I am joined by a special guest, Jeff Pantanella, who is an author of many books. The one that I'm most familiar with is the Ever Hero Saga, which is up to 8 books, I believe.
8 books written, a short story, and working on book 9 right now.
Wow. And is there also some spin-offs or?
So the way that I constructed this, and there's a story behind it, but for now, I thought that authors that write books that go on for like 20, 30, 50 books is a bit much, and it's a bit much to really force someone to invest that kind of time and money into just coming to the end of the series, right?
Right.
So I thought, okay, well, to keep people's interests, I can write these miniseries. And each miniseries is 3 to 4 books, full length novels. And I try to treat them like Frank Miller's Sin City world, where you'll have different these aren't graphic novels, but you'll have different stories that are standalone, but the characters from one can then come into the stories of the other books and the other miniseries, so that what happens is you start to get this very vast world happening where there's a lot of different plot lines, a lot of different agendas, so that readers have something to, latch onto for each miniseries. But if they have favorite characters from other miniseries, they may find them in later miniseries. See what I
Gotcha.
mean? So I'm trying to make a little something for everyone.
Now, I've always wondered, in a world that's this expansive, how far ahead did you have this planned when you sat down to write book one? Did you think it was going to be a trilogy? Did you think it was going to be this many books, or did you kind of just let the story dictate where you went?
Yeah, so that's part of the story. So I went to art school when I was younger, and one of my best friends became a cover artist. His name is Gene Malika, and he's got his own studio. He did a number of the book covers on my books. And when I decided I was going to write a book and I was kind of getting through it, I thought, okay, I'm going to need someone to do the cover art. And every time I go into a Barnes and Nobles and I go to the fantasy section, I pull out a cover or pull out a book and I see the cover. I'm like, oh, that's an awesome cover. Who did it? And then it was my buddy Gene. So I called him up and I said, hey, I'm writing a book, and I'd like you to do the illustration, the cover art for the first book. And he said, okay, all right, great. And then he said, how many books do you have? And I said, no, just the one. Just that's it. I'm just trying to do one. He goes, well, do you want to make any money? And I said, sure, that would be a nice perk. He said, well, you can't just have one. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, readers like series, and standalone books don't really do well. So you're gonna have to do at least 3. And I was like, 3? The whole story is around one book. And so he goes, no, that's not gonna work. And so I said, all right. So I had to go back and start looking at what I've written and think, okay, how can I make this into two, at least two more books? And I had to scrap the whole thing. And so I started over with the idea that, okay, I need to make this evolve into a much bigger story. And so I wrote it again, and then I realized that it was horrible. And so I wrote it again and realized that I was rewriting a book that I was reading. So scrapped that. And the fourth version is the Chaos Gate that's right here, which is book one of the series.
It,
So
it's
there you have it.
it's funny that you say that because I had an interview yesterday with another author named
Yeah,
Marshall J. Moore,
yeah,
and he said that when he first got picked up for his first manuscript, they told him, they're like, "Is there any way you can make this a trilogy?"
yeah.
And he was like, I could try. And then he did a little research, and it turns out that most publishing houses don't make the money back until the third book.
Right, right. Which
And
which
that's
is true for most indie authors as well. I mean,
yeah,
really,
it really, and it makes sense when you think about it, but I had never even considered it before why there's so many series.
right, 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 right. So
Which I'm actually okay with. I have a problem. I'm addressing it in 2025, but I call myself a serial series starter. I have
mhm,
read, especially since I got on Book Talk 2 years ago, I have jumped into probably 30 or 40 series,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I love all of them. But I have very much like, oh, what else is out there? I need to start
yeah,
more.
yeah. I
This
do the
year, I'm
same.
trying to reel it in and get through more series, but I love series because I don't want things to end.
Right, right.
I love
Well, go ahead.
I love getting into a world, and then as you learn it more, it's like you can take a year off and jump back in because you're so familiar with everything.
Right, right. Well, that's actually a big reason why I wrote the books into these miniseries, because I thought, all right, how do I keep people's attention when there's so much, shiny things out there? So, what if I have one bit that's about, like, monks and witches and sorcerers and demons and devils, and then the next series is more about kind of like blue eye samurai, type of a teenage ninja that is out for redemption, and that was the second miniseries. And the third, I was like, all right, well, I think dark elves are pretty cool, so let me craft something around that. And then the fourth miniseries, which will finalize everything and bring all of the miniseries together, is this cosmic battle between the seven heavens and the abyss, and the hierarchy of power, and what happens when all of that collides, and which has been something that I've always been sort of fascinated with throughout my life anyway. So I thought, oh, that'd be a pretty interesting thing to delve into.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to writing, is writing something that you've always done, or is this something that you got into more recently?
Yeah. So I went to, like I said, I went to art school, and I after college, I went overseas, and I had a fellowship to study in Europe. And then when I came back to the States, I got into advertising because I thought, okay, well, I need to do something to make money, and then still painting on the side. And then that led me into making video games. And so right when all the 3D animation was starting, I was, um, at a company called, at the time, Spectrum Holobyte, which made mostly flight simulation games, but then they got the license for Star Trek and started making Star Trek games. And so I was like an art director of sorts for the Top Gun license, which is another flight simulation game, or the license from the movie, which we made a game out of. So my role was to create the 3D backgrounds that we green screened live actors onto. So that was pretty cool, and
That is very cool.
a lot of work. I
I can
mean,
imagine.
it's a lot of time pushing pixels and vertices. It went in the 3D realm at that time. I don't even know what they do now. So while I was there, I mean, I was pretty good. I have a very solid art background, but not a very, my mind doesn't work very technically. And so the other people that were I was friends with at these companies, at this company, they later went on to like Digital Domain and ILM, and that was their level. And I thought, you know, I'm never going to be that level with this stuff. And it's not really what I want to do because, like I said, it's just a lot of like mouse click and dun, dun, and then you got to set
Yeah.
something to render forever. Anyway, fast forward, I eventually went from the Bay Area down to Los Angeles, and I live in Southern California now. And kind of soul searching for a while. I found my way into doing real estate sales. Eventually, had my own brokerage and did a lot of the high end stuff. And if you're aware of what happened in the Pacific Palisades in Los Angeles this past summer, the fire
Right.
just tore through. I sold a bunch of those homes, which was just kind of crazy that they're gone. But anyway, the reason why I bring that up is because art or being creative has always been in my blood. And I realized that the more of the work that I was doing in real estate, I was neglecting what I did, what my passion was. And so, of course, probably as every middle-aged guy goes through, the depression hit and the what am I doing with my life and everything else. And so I had to do a course correction. And when I came out of that, I thought, well, you know what? What if I just tried to write a book? And this was in 2014, I think. That's when I first just started. Let me just see if I could do a short story or something, just something.
Yeah.
And over the next 4 years, I was going through this: write the first book, then trash it; write the first book, then trash it. So I did it 4 times. And it wasn't until about 2020 that finished the first book, released it, and thought, you know what? I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna make this happen. If I can do one, I can do two. And if I can do two, then I can do those three that my friend Gene said I had to do.
Yeah.
And then it just became like, this is what I do.
That's very cool. That's part of why I started this podcast because I'm 40 now, and
Mm-hmm.
I got injured about 8 years ago, and it limits my mobility. I have a chronic pain issue, but I spent years kind of lost with the what do I do now,
Yeah,
and not feeling like I was working towards anything that I was passionate about.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I was like, you know what? I feel like I'm not the only middle aged person that's kind of going through this. I
yeah.
think a
No,
lot of people end up in jobs and either have forgotten about their passion or wish they were working towards their passion.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's this podcast has kind of become mine. And learning that because I was never artistic as a kid, or I can't draw more than a stick figure.
Huh.
My daughter's amazingly gifted with art. I didn't get it from me, but that's why like content creation and the podcast, I figured out that there's more than one way to be creative,
Oh yeah, yeah.
which is with like I've considered writing just for fun, just for myself sometimes. And it's like I'm trying to remember who said. I think it was someone from Book Talk, but they recently got into writing, and they were like, just write a book from
Mm-hmm.
start to finish. It doesn't even have to be good. No one else has to read it,
Yeah,
but just tell the story that's in your head,
yeah,
even if it's just for yourself.
yeah, yeah. That's it's really great advice. I get asked a lot, whether it's on TikTok or IG or Facebook. Um, hey, I really want to write something. I've got this great idea, but I have no idea how to go about doing it. And they say, geez, you've got so many books here. How do you do it? And I said, you got to stop thinking about the mountain and just think about the next 5 steps. And if you can do 5 steps, you can do five more, and so forth and so forth. And I said, listen, guys, I'd love to do this full time, but I don't. I've got another job that I need to help pay the bills. I've got a family, and I live in Southern California. It's not cheap here, and um, so I wake up at 4 in the morning, and every day, 7 days a week, I wake up and I get 2 hours in of just pounding out the keys, and a lot of it's trash. And you just gotta realize that it's okay to make trash, because the more you do it, the more you get to those 10,000 hours of on task with something, the more your craft starts to become a real thing. and
Right.
not just something that you're dreaming about.
Now, you do that every day. Do you set a time goal or a word goal, or how do you work that?
No, there's a lot to do when you're an indie author. And so it's not just writing the book. It's editing your own work. It's creating uh, the outline for the next book so that what you're doing now makes sense for the whole arc of that series and all the characters and what they're doing. Um, Sometimes it's working on the covers. I do a lot of the covers myself because like I said, I've got that art background. So
That's definitely very helpful.
yeah, well, and again, it's not cheap, and so if you get a really good book cover, it's going to cost you anywhere from $1,000 to $2,500 just for one cover.
Yeah.
Audiobooks are the same. They're each one of them, and the way that I do them is it's excessive, but I have a top notch narrator, and I've hired a special effects and music score guy to create special effects as to, like, swords clashing and crowd murmuring, and he has developed an original soundtrack for every audiobook starting with the Kazumi series. And so again, it cost a bunch. So my point is that there's a and then there's okay, so then there's the marketing, right? So whether it's TikTok or Facebook or IG, you got to take time to understand how those platforms work, making the videos, doing things like this. Um, so I just try to partition off whatever I need to do that week during the few hours I have before my family wakes up and school happens or work happens or whatever.
Yeah, being independently published, you kind of have to wear a lot of hats, it seems.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, do you have someone else edit it once you think you're at like a final point, or
Oh yeah, yeah, and she's brutal, which is great. So she, when we first started working together, can I say the name? Is
yeah,
that
of
okay?
course.
Yeah, her name is Maureen Newman, and she's up in Canada. And if anyone is looking for an editor, she is top notch, and she's not also you pay for you get what you pay for.
Yeah, I
So
would imagine.
yeah, but the point is, and I said that Maureen and I had a conversation about this when she first came on. I said, listen, I don't need someone just to uh, fix the grammar. Okay, if I miss a period or I put a comma where a period should be, whatever, I obviously I need that. I need a set of eyes looking at that. But that's not really what I need, because there's so many softwares out there that you can put your work into, and they'll make all those grammatical corrections. Right. What I really need is for someone to understand who the characters are, and if they don't, tell me, because that means I'm doing a bad job of conveying who they are.
Yeah.
And if as the story is progressing, if they falter in their true behavior, just for the sake of where the story's going, I need you to raise a hand and say, "Nah, Kazumi would never do that. She would never say that. This is what she would do." And
Right. Yeah, because I imagine it's hard to catch that yourself always, because you
right.
can lie to yourself a little bit and be like, "Oh, no, it's all right.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Maybe he would do that," but someone else can be a little bit more objective about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that also Maureen is great at is, yeah, I've got a bit of a scatterbrain, so when I'm writing, all this junk is going in, and then I try to edit it so that it makes sense. But oftentimes I'll have something happening here, and then it jumps to something else happening, and then it jumps to a third thing happening, but then it goes back to the first thing happening. And when I get my manuscripts back from Maureen, she's got arrows pointing and paragraphs moved and all this stuff, so that it helps with the flow of the storyline and the action that's happening within the scene, which, with what you just said, I'm absolutely blind to, because I'm just seeing like the whole thing from like 360 degrees. So it all
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
makes sense. but it won't make sense to someone who doesn't have, access to my head.
Yeah, because you have insider knowledge that might not have made it to the page yet.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Now,
So
where did the inspiration come from for this world you created? It sounds like it's kind of anime inspired. Are you a big anime fan?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So obviously, like everyone else probably that is interested in your podcast, they've played Dungeons and Dragons growing up. They read Forgotten Realms, any of the World of Greyhawk, any of these things were part of their either now or in their youth, and so I was very influenced by that. And then I got into anime and not so much the manga, but more just I love the movies like Ninja Scroll. I thought is just amazing. Love that. A bunch
That
of
was actually the first anime movie I ever saw when I was
no,
in
no
high school.
kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jubei is kind of like I look at him sort of like who the main character in the first miniseries Kasai is. Now Kasai doesn't wield a katana, um, but it's sort of his like loner disposition. He wants to do the right thing. Sometimes he does. Sometimes he doesn't. Um, but he's got an agenda, and I like how these other people kind of come into his world and act as support vehicles. And the Five Devils of Kimon come into play in like the later series, not those actual characters, but that idea where there's like this nefarious underworld of activity happening, and these champions of chaos come into the fold, and normal people just they can't deal with it. They just fold. So it needs to be someone like the Ever Hero or Kazumi or Eden in the later books that rise up as heroes to challenge them, and that's kind of the battle that happens. Part of the battle that happens, and yeah, I've always liked the idea of the underdog, and not just the underdog for the sake of here's a person that has overwhelming odds against them, but what happens to them as the pressure starts to mount, right? So if they're going through their challenges and the challenges prove too hard, do they cave and go a different road, like maybe more towards the villain or the dark side of things, or do they go more towards I'm going to get through it, I'm going to persevere, this is my destiny, this is what I have to do, for whatever their reason is, they go that route.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I love kind of like those crossroads that happen in a story where hopefully the reader can cheer the person on or boo the person based on the decisions that they start to make.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, does your reading taste line up with your writing taste, or do you read different kinds of things outside of fantasy?
Oh yeah, yeah. So for a while, all I read was existential stuff, like Camus and Sartre, and I got into Carl Jung and Freud and all this
Heavy,
stuff.
heavy thinker stuff.
Yeah, not to be. I don't even know what the right word is, but it just was fascinating to me how the mind works, and um, what happens in our daily life and how that affects who we are as a person. Is it nature versus nurture? What is it that makes us who we are? And I think some of that comes from I have an older brother and a younger sister, and both of them in their chosen careers were wildly successful. And my older brother, wildly successful at like the level of Michael Jordan in basketball.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so just like he is an absolute genius in business, and he's an industry leader in what he does, which is on the one hand, I applaud him and I'm very proud of him. On the other hand, what do you think it's like growing up in Michael Jordan's shadow if you're
Yeah.
also a basketball player, right?
Yeah.
And
That's tough.
so it's there, like there's no resentment, but there's always a, well, how come if all the kids grew up the same way and we all had the same advantages and disadvantages, how come he did that? And how come my little sister did that? And why am I like, bouncing along the bottom trying to figure out, what my world is supposed to be like? That soul searching and trying to figure stuff out. And I'll tell you something, Jay. I think it was because from the very beginning, they both knew their first best destiny. To borrow something from Spock in Star Trek, they both knew their first best destiny, and they went for it, and they never stopped. And I stopped, right, because I had the passion for art. I went to a great art school. I had a Guggenheim Fellowship after that. I was on a path, and then life happened and I got battered around. And so remember when I was talking about the hero's journey and what happens and do they rise above or do they falter? I faltered. And so I'm always trying to examine that based on my own life and how can I put that into the characters in my books. And so all that, mind stuff, the books about, existentialism, Carl Jung, all that kind of stuff was all me without even knowing it, trying to figure out why am I different? Why am I not, you know, in the stratosphere rather than still being, on, not curbside, but why am I, down on the planet surface still?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's actually super relatable for a lot of people too, because
Yeah,
I think I think it's a lot more rare than people realize to be a kid. Because even going to college, looking back, you're still a kid
yeah,
and be so sure of what you want to do. And there
yeah,
are the outliers that have that, but I think a lot more people kind of do end up bouncing around trying to figure out where their place is and self doubt and
yeah,
wondering if they should be doing something else. I think there's a lot of that.
yeah.
And that's actually something that's really, I think, useful to bring into fiction as well. And I think that's where a lot of people overlook fiction for what you can learn from it. It-
Well, I'll tell you, when people ask me, what are the books about? Okay. I'm always tempted to give the answer that they want to hear, which is, oh, it's action and adventure, and the underdog goes up against these overwhelming odds and saves the day and whatever. But I've chosen not to put Hollywood endings into my books. I'd rather have them be more aligned with real life and the struggles that people face. And obviously, the struggles in here are more fantastic rather than driving the car and having an accident or whatever. But still, they're they're based on having courage, and so where if people ever ask me for advice, I say have courage in your conviction. If you want to write, then write. But you got to write every day. You can't just say, "Oh, today I feel inspired, so I'm going to write," and call yourself a writer. No, every day you got to do something to progress your craft, right? And that
yeah.
takes courage because the world wants you to fail. It's not intentionally. It's just the nature of the beast.
Yep.
And there's a lot of pressure to be successful, to make a certain amount of money, to live up to your parents' expectations. I mean, the list goes on, and it's having that courage to get past the naysayers and say, no, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
part of the character arcs have that involved.
And I think that it takes a lot of courage even to realize that your idea of success might be different than what your parents want or what society
Mhm.
wants,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
sticking with it. And I think that's something that characters encounter a lot in fiction.
Yeah.
And I've known people who I wouldn't say they poo poo at fiction, but they're like, well, why aren't you reading nonfiction? Why aren't you reading self help? But it's like
Right.
you can gain a lot from fictional characters just because it's a story. They're still going through relatable things. They're learning valuable lessons.
Yeah.
It's like
It's I'm sorry, go ahead.
I've read horror books that tackle large topics like, grief and things like that that you wouldn't expect to be in a scary book, but it's like
Right.
genre fiction has a lot to offer that I think a lot of people overlook.
Well, it's the story that latches on to your latches on to meaning for any individual person. So if they can relate to the story and they can relive the story, that is what will enable them to grow, because they can kind of, oh yeah, this is what that character did. This is not so much do this and you'll be happy. No, it's more
Yeah.
like the character went through the same kind of struggle I'm going through, and all they did was they kept on taking a step forward. They kept on finding out who they needed to be, and they were relentless in that pursuit. And I think that's I don't know, maybe I do this for self-help, I don't know.
It could be.
Yeah.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
No, shifting directions a little bit. I'm
Right.
curious what your take is on this. I only create content basically on TikTok. That's the only place I've ever really made content.
Mhm.
I've fallen in love with Book Talk. I think it's a great space compared to a lot of other platforms.
Right.
How have you found it on the opposite side of things, being an independent author who's doing a little, some self promotion in there as well?
Sure, sure. So, that's a great question, and it's a great question because there's a lot of different answers to it. So, firstly, TikTok is awesome because of the exposure that you get, but it can become a double-edged sword. So here's a for instance. Uh, right now, I have a post that will not stop going viral. It's climbing and climbing, climbing. I think I'm at, I don't know, 150,000 or more views on it, and I get comments and I get likes and I get saves and all this stuff. The problem is the audience age group is not my age group. And
Okay.
so the comments, so I get a lot of comments that are just kind of I don't want to say haters, but people that are just trying to say something, and it's negative. And then other people latch onto that thread, and eventually I'm like, well, this is no good. But what happens is the algorithm says, oh, this is getting a lot of playtime.
Right. It
I'm
doesn't
going
know
to
what
keep
the comments say. It's
right,
getting a lot of them.
right. And what I've noticed is ever since this particular post shot through the roof, the my other posts have absolutely dumped in the newer posts that I've been making. They've dumped in viewer count to like under 100. What? And
Yeah, that's
so
always frustrating.
yeah, and so I'm like, all right, do I let it blow over? Do I take a break? What do I do? And even if okay, so with posting on TikTok, you can get a lot of exposure, and a lot of people will come and make better comments, and then purchase the books, which is amazing and wonderful, and I love it. But when you have I think a negative slant happening, those sales go down as well. And I'm not
Yeah.
quite sure why or how or what it is, but that's been my experience over the last couple of weeks. And so I'm like, okay, is this because we had that weird shutdown a few weeks ago on January 19th, or is this something else? And when that happened, I was like, all right, you know what? I need a different resource. I need to be able to still attract my audience, but I can't rely on TikTok. So then I got to go through Facebook, and Facebook has its challenges, to be sure. But I figure it's probably a good idea to diversify with the information that I've gleaned from TikTok as far as my audience and the hooks and the type of videos to create, I can create my Facebook exposure similar to that and see how it does, which is what I'm doing now.
Yeah, and I think there is something to what you said about the brief shutdown of 12 hours or whatever it was.
Right.
I've noticed, I mean, I've posted less content since then, and I've noticed a lot of my favorite book talk creators have kind of done the same. And there has been a shift, I think, because there's still a bunch of uncertainty in terms of
Yeah.
TikTok's future. So I
Right.
think a lot of people kind of took a step back and are kind of waiting to see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I, yeah, I don't want to get political, so
Yeah,
I'll leave that out. But
that's fair.
I do think that um, with things that are happening, not just in the states but across the globe, uh, it just may go away because somebody wants to hurt somebody else.
Yeah,
And I don't just mean that here to there or there to here. I just mean in general. I just think there's a lot going on right now that
there is. Now, how have you found Facebook to be so far? Are you able to make direct sales on other platforms as well?
yes. So I do not advertise on Amazon because Amazon just they they take all of the profit that any book generates for themselves. And so I could have a book on the market for, I don't know, $6, an ebook for $6 or $5 or whatever, and I'll get, a dollar every time one sells. And I'm like, what? I
Yeah,
can't, yeah.
Amazon's fees are massive.
Oh yeah,
I
they're horrible.
since my
But
injury, I've done a lot of online selling, and
mhm,
I've had an Amazon store before, and I did FBA where I would send in products to them, and they would warehouse it. So they do a lot of the work. I understood
mhm.
that, but it's like every 6 months or so they increase their fees at a
Right.
rate that like my prices can't keep up with. And
Yeah,
it's like it went from they used to take 50%, and it's like they're probably taking 65% now.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And
It's
and when you also have to pay for the advertising, so so maybe not so much with what you just said, but with the books. So okay, so there's the printing costs, the book cover costs, the editing costs, the time. If you make an audiobook, there's all those things as well. Production costs are much higher. And then with the marketing costs on top of that, really, unless you have a stack of books that you're selling and you're only making a little bit on each one, it's really hard to make a profit. So it's really hard to stay in business as it is. And I don't know why Amazon does that. They probably, I think they don't really make that much from indie authors or selling on selling books in general. So they just don't care. So they're just trying to say how can we make as much as we can that people will bear.
yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah,
But
Amazon's great in the sense that they have everything, but
yeah, yeah.
they're also not the biggest company in the country by mistake, so they're gonna get theirs.
Right, right, right. Now, what's interesting is whether I'm only on TikTok or I'm on TikTok and Facebook, my Amazon sales definitely go up. So it's just some people. It's funny they just feel more comfortable, even though they're paying more to buy from Amazon than direct from the person who made the product. It's an
Yeah, I
interesting.
think it's just people have become so used to shopping on Amazon. I think it
Yeah.
just becomes a comfort for many people.
Right, and I think they probably think it's safe, and maybe they've been burned by some other scam in the past, and so that carries forward into the future. I
Yeah.
get it. I get it. Yeah.
Now, do you enjoy the content creation process, or is it just advertising?
Okay, so yes, I do enjoy it because I just my mind is always thinking of new ideas. The part that I think is a little frustrating is I could make a video of something that I think, oh, this is great. I love this. I think the sound is good, the message is good. Um, I feel like I'm offering something to the viewer, and it'll tank. And then I'll put something. I'll just slap something up, and it'll go up, and it'll go on for days and days and days. I'm like, I don't get it. I just don't
Yeah,
get it.
some of what I would consider my funniest ideas have they've jumped to 100 views within minutes,
Yeah,
and then somehow they're not eligible for the FYP, and
yeah,
they just stop there. And
yeah,
then, like, my highest viewed video is one that I made as I was about to walk out the door to go do errands.
yeah, yeah.
I did one take of it was when the demure was
Oh,
going
right,
off with that trend. So
right, right, right.
I did a bookish version of that. It took about 40 seconds right before I walked out the door. I posted it, left, didn't even think about it, and it just took off.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
I
so
get it.
and
Yeah,
that's and to me, I was like, that was probably one of my least creative ideas. It was just following the same trend that everyone else has already set up. But I guess the algorithm likes that sometimes.
yeah. It's a funky thing. There was a this is, I think, March of last year, where I had my first video shoot through the roof. And before that one happened, for about 2 to 3 weeks, I could do no wrong. And I would post something, and it would immediately get 350 views. And then within, I don't know, 30 minutes, it would be at 2,500. And this was kind of pretty much consistent with every video that I made. And I was like, oh, I've got it. I've got this TikTok thing down. And then one video shot through the roof, and then a week later, a second one did. And I was just like, oh my god, I don't have enough inventory. I have too many sales happening, and I didn't think this was going to happen. And then maybe 2 months later, they changed some things with the algorithm, and I've never gotten back to that type of consistent, you know, 4 to 5 figure um, view count. It's always like 350 to 800, somewhere in
Yeah.
there. So I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah. They seem to make algorithm shifts pretty frequently.
Yeah, and I wonder why. Is it so that no one advertiser can corner the market, and then that allows for nobody else to get enough views, or what are they trying to tweak? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely could be something like that. They don't want anyone to game the system too much.
Yeah. Mm.
Now, moving into what I call the beyond section of books and beyond, what are some of your biggest passions and interests outside of writing? I imagine art is probably a big part of it since that's your background.
Right. So although I don't do it so much right now because my new family, um, I don't have a place to paint. Like, when I paint, like, so I painted this behind me, and that's just one type of style. I've done photorealism, abstract stuff, landscape stuff, portraiture. I mean, all kinds of stuff. I mean, that's been my passion for my life. So I've always had a studio wherever I lived. It's just where we live right now isn't very conducive to that, and the writing that I do really kind of takes a lot more of that time. But really, anything creative is is usually where my first step goes. Um, I used to play a lot of sports and work out a lot. Now that I'm getting older, that's seemingly less important. Not that I don't do it. It's just it's not something that I'm just like, yeah, let's go do
More something that's closer to a chore. You need to do it to maintain, but not as enthusiastically.
Oh, yeah. So my wife and daughter are they're heavy into Taekwondo, and so my daughter will have her black belt. She's 9. She'll have her black belt in about 3 months, and then my wife, who is going to turn 51 this year, she'll have her black belt 6 months later. So
Oh, that's very cool.
yeah, so but there's there's also a lot of like, well, why don't you do it too? We could do it all as a family. And I'm like, I can't move like that anymore. I just, the kicks and the stretching, and it just doesn't.
Yeah, taekwondo. I did taekwondo as a kid,
Okay,
and I was naturally flexible as a kid, and you'd need a lot of it because taekwondo is very kick heavy.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah, yeah,
you really need that.
yeah,
That's why
yes.
I transitioned in young adulthood. I was doing Brazilian jiu jitsu.
Oh wow,
And I was like, I quickly learned that I didn't have the same flexibility from when I was a kid, and it was like I was having to stretch. I mean, I was stretching probably 30 to 45 minutes every morning just
yeah,
trying to
yeah,
get to the level of some of these other guys,
right,
and
right,
it's like it's a big time requirement.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I what I do mostly what I do now is I swim. So we have an LA Fitness nearby, and I'll just go into the pool and I'll do laps for 35, 40 minutes. That to me is a great workout because when I jump over into weights, I'm dumb, and so I'll be doing whatever I'm doing, and my competitive nature takes over. From being an athlete growing up, and I'm like, I'll struggle through the last reps, and then I'll hurt myself, and
Yeah,
uh,
ego lift a little bit.
yeah, yeah, it's dumb and it's stupid. I do it every time,
Yeah,
and so I'm just like, listen, just don't do weightlifting, just swim, and that's good.
swimming is a fantastic workout. It is.
Yeah,
It's super low impact, and it's a lot harder than people realize to
yeah.
maintain even a moderate pace for any amount of time.
Right, 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 right. So
I
that's
I
a
grew up I grew up on an island, so I did a lot of swimming and surfing as a teen, and I tried again in my 20s, and I was like, "Oh, man, I lost this particular type of cardio."
yeah,
Like,
yeah. What island?
Nantucket Island in Massachusetts.
Oh no, shit. I grew up. Can I say that?
Yeah, oh,
Um,
yeah.
I grew up in Massachusetts as well.
Oh, did
I,
you really? What part?
yeah. So I grew up in Westford, which is about 40 minutes north of Boston, 25 minutes um, just south of the border with New Hampshire.
Okay,
And
I
so
yeah, I
as a kid, I would get onto the Cape and spend time at like, geez, I forget where it was now. Um, and but yeah, I mean, all through Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, the whole bit.
yeah, I went to college for a year and a half, in Nashua, New Hampshire.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, right by the border.
Yeah, UNH.
No, it doesn't even exist anymore. It was a small school called Daniel Webster College. It was,
Oh yeah, I know
aviation
that.
school
It was what?
an aviation school.
Yeah, yeah. I have another friend that I think he may have taken early classes there when he was in not I think when he was in our college years, so early early 90s. And so yeah, those are some fun stories where
Yeah,
yeah.
it was a fun area, and it's also not that far from Boston. We used to shoot
Yeah.
down to Boston when we wanted to, like, actually go out in a city. It wasn't
Mhm.
that bad of a drive, but it was it was small enough with the amount of kids on campus that it kinda just felt like an extension of high school.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I think at the time there was only 1,200 kids on campus,
Oh wow.
so it was, like, a little bit boring.
And so what happened to your aviation career?
I I I figured out at a young age that, I love flying, I loved that aspect of it, but I figured out that I wasn't going to want to be away from a family someday,
Mhm.
and a big part of being a commercial pilot is being gone.
Wow, yeah, of course.
So it's I kind of, they didn't have a ton of other majors, so I ended up leaving that school, and then from there, yeah, young and dumb, I had the opportunity to restart at Northeastern because I had a connection, but I would have
Mhm.
had to restart as a freshman. And
Yeah.
I was like almost done with my sophomore year, and I was like, I'm not doing that. So I
Yeah.
was like, I'll join the Navy. So I went and did that instead, and
Expansive.
it's like looking back, it's like probably not the smartest thing, but here we
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. 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 Oh,
But
no
no,
kidding.
I still I've always loved aviation and flying. And when I was a kid, my in middle school, my dad actually for a couple years owned a little 4-seater single engine airplane because
Oh,
he
no.
had his private pilot's license.
So, did you ever were you able to fly solo
Oh
by the
yeah,
time? Yeah, of
yep,
course. So when my friend Rondo would be doing his practice hours, we'd get in a little Cessna and we'd go up, we'd fly around our neighborhoods and that sort of thing.
yeah.
And then he'd say, "Okay, so I need to practice some of my moves." And I'm like, "Okay." And so he goes, "So this is what is it called when you if you're flying like this and then you go like this and you go around?"
Oh yeah,
So
circles around a point.
yeah, so we did that. So that was a little odd because
Yeah,
you're parallel to the ground. And then he says, "Okay, JP, I got to. The next one we're gonna do is called the power stall." And I'd be
yep,
like, "Power stall? I like the power part, but what are we doing with the stall part?" And he goes, "Yo, just watch." And so we start going up and up and up and up, straight up into the air until the engine stalls out, and you have like that moment where you're suspended in the air, and
yeah.
then
Right before
and
you
then
start falling.
yeah, and meanwhile he's like, we're falling down, and he's working to start the plane again, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm gonna die right here, but
Yeah, the first time that 'cause you start with just soloing in the pattern where you just take off, circle back, and land,
yeah,
and you do that for a while. And then we had there was an area near the college that was considered the practice area.
hmm,
And the first time I soloed out there, I was supposed to do all of those maneuvers, so I was like, all right. And then I did the stall way harder than I needed to, and I really nosed it over once it stalled. And I forgot that there was wooden chocks in the back that you would put around the tires when you were parked on the ground,
hmm, yeah,
and it went flying up and hit the roof of the plane. And so it's just it's like there's not a whole lot to the interior, so it just
yeah,
hits
right.
metal, and it was like, oh my god, like I thought I was gonna die. I thought I thought I broke the plane, and I was like, all right, this is my first time here. I should probably chill out a little bit. But yeah, it's pretty. Looking back, it's kind of crazy that it. I mean, we were 18 years old, and the school had I don't even know 60, 70 Cessna 172s that
Yeah.
once you got your license, you could just check them out.
Oh
So it's
wow,
like there would be upperclassmen that already had their pilot's license, and they'd be like, "All right, who wants to go to Buffalo, New York, to get buffalo wings?" And you just pile in the plane and go on a little trip.
that's funny.
Yeah,
It's like renting go-karts.
yeah. It's just, I mean, and you just because technically it was all towards your practicing, and it all fit the curriculum. So yeah, you were just allowed to take the planes,
Wow, that's
which
wild.
that part of it was fun. And then I didn't get to this part, but back then they even had aerobatic planes that were part of the curriculum, where
What
you
are
would
they?
have to aerobatic planes where you went up and learned how to do like barrel rolls, loops, and things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
And I mean, it was a very cool school in that aspect, but it was just like the campus life was a little bit too small. And coming from a small island, I wanted something bigger. And then I eventually ended up in New York City, which is where I live right outside of New York City now. And
yeah, yeah.
the exact opposite of Nantucket is what I ended up wanting.
Oh, I get it. I mean, I moved when I was growing up. I grew up, as you know now, outside of Boston, and then went through all the winters there and the humid summers. And then after I graduated from RISD, I went to Europe, and then I came back. I was like, you know what? There's no way I'm staying in New England. And so I went straight to the West Coast, and I landed in San Francisco because I had some connections from the Guggenheim Museum in Italy that said, "Hey, well, listen, when you're done here, come to San Francisco. I've got some art directors that work at Saatchi and Saatchi, Chiat, all these major advertising agencies. I'll introduce you, and you can start doing work for them." So I said, "Sure, I'll go." And I'm thinking in my head, San Francisco is like Baywatch. and it's
No.
not. And so I arrived in like, I don't know, early June, and it's like cold and kind of rainy and foggy, of course. And I go to the beach, and it's all like this weird industrial black sand. And I'm
Right.
like, where are the volleyball nets? Where, where, where are the bikinis? Where's like all, the surfers? And I saw like one guy just fishing, and windmills behind him. I'm like, I have been misled. This is
Yeah,
not right.
much different climate up there than SoCal.
Yeah, right, right, right. So it all works out, I guess.
Yeah, it does. Well, I've taken up just about an hour of your time. I figure this is probably a good spot to wrap it up.
Sure.
And I will link in the description of this episode to you have your website
Hmm.
and TikTok. Is there anywhere else that people can find you?
Um, those are the two best places. TikTok is probably the best, just because you're there so much, and it'll. But YouTube, I have a YouTube channel as well.
Okay. I'll link to all of those in the description
Okay.
below.
Yeah, great. And before I forget, so one of the things that I do, uh, for people like yourself who have kind of gone out of your way to help promote my books and support what I do as an indie author, I need you to give me a character name that I can put into the books.
Oh, I'm gonna have to think about that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't have to give it to me right now, but definitely do that. I'll hound you for it, because
Okay.
as the as more and more books get written, I've got all of these characters, and sometimes they just die right away, and sometimes they
That's fun
become,
too.
yeah, they become very pivotal. So so please let me know. I'd love to put male or female, doesn't matter, whatever you want, but I'm going to need a little backstory behind them.
I'll conference in my 15-year-old daughter. She can help me
All right, perfect,
plan
perfect.
this out.
Yeah,
That's
perfect.
awesome.
Yeah, you're absolutely my
All
pleasure.
right. Thank you so much for taking a little bit of time out of your day to join us.
All right, no problem, Jay. I appreciate it.
All right. And as always, everyone, thank you for stopping by, and I will be back next week.